Hi, my name is Jeff Pagano, and welcome to the Harpin On Rugby podcast. Joining me this week is someone making his 11th Harpin Pod appearance, and he's also the early pace setter after 4 rounds in his debut season on the Harpin Super Brew League. So at least one Leinster fan has something to cling on to after that weekend. Welcome back to Mr. Hugo Gordon.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Yeah, holding on to that one.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll take whatever we can get. Okay, well, listen, we might as well, no putting it off any longer. We'll just get straight into our feature match of the week. Here's an generic 80-word summary of the match. Leinster lost 31-14 to Munster in front of just under 52,000 at Croke Park, despite an early try from Ronan Kelleher. Munster responded with scores from Gleeson, Farrell and Coughlin, building a 21-7 halftime lead. Injuries and head assessments disrupted Leinster's rhythm, while Crowley's boot and a penalty try sealed Munster's bonus point win. Scott Penny's late converted try offered consolation, but Leinster's second-half efforts fell short. Frawley's yellow card compounded their woes in a bruising United Rugby Championship clash. Now, obviously, we'll be trying to go in a little bit more detail, though probably not too much than that. But just to kick things off, Hugo is going to take a look at Leinster's numerous, how about we call them issues?
Yeah, it was, the thing is, we did start strongly. The first 10 minutes, actually, I was feeling pretty good about this. We were kind of pretty much consistently on the attack for that opening 10 minutes. It was all us on the ball. We had a few kind of chances that we didn't quite take before we finally got over with Keller getting over after a maul in the corner. And at that stage, I was feeling pretty good. It had been, it had been the kind of start you wanted from us. And there were, one or two things that did work for us, mainly around the scrum, which was consistently good the whole way through, particularly in the first half where we were really just bullying them. And that kind of front row of Keller, Tadhg Furlong and Paddy McCarthy, who I thought had another actually good game and someone who is emerging from this opening period with quite a lot of credit. But frankly, after that opening 10 minutes, virtually nothing else did work. We faded out of the game quite badly. Maybe fading out's the wrong word. We spent a lot of time on the ball, had a lot of possession. We had 69% possession in territory during this game. And we just were not able to do anything really with it. The attack just looked very blunt. The story of the game really was just phase after phase of Leinster attack, but just not going anywhere. We really struggled after that opening 10 minutes to kind of find any penetration whatsoever. We had plenty of chances to win this game, plenty of chances to score, both in the first and second half. And I think the game was really summed up by some of these passages. There was that passage just before half time where it felt like maybe if we could have scored then, we could have gotten back into it. There was that 15-minute or so passage in the second half where it was just basically us in the Munster 22, relentlessly attacking for no reward. And I will comment a bit to what Munster did well in that respect, but after, it is a sign again, and we've seen a little bit of signs over the last couple of seasons of Leinster's attack maybe not being as clinical as it used to be, and some things that still need to be worked out there. But the main issue really in this game was yet again poor defense. Munster did not really get into our 22 that often, but when they did, they almost always scored. They were gifted, 2 tries, at least. Admittedly, the second try, Crowley's very clever, chip, over the top, which, Farrell was able to regather, slightly dubiously legally, but to be honest, I don't think any ref is ever going to give that as a deliberate tip forward, and it was very clever play, but it just felt like a try out of nothing. And then the interception, Coughlin's interception off Gibson Park's pass, we were 21-7 down, kind of without Munster seemingly having had to try it all that hard in attack. And it would be one thing if it was just this game, a bit of a blip, a bit of a bad day, but this is starting to turn into the tail of this season. We've conceded 36% as many points in these opening 4 games as we did in the entire URC last season, 21 games. We've conceded, there's 3 games this season out of the 4 we've played so far. We've conceded 30 plus points. We conceded that happened to us twice all last season in both Europe and the URC. 1 game against Scotland, 1 game against Northampton where we conceded more than 30 points. We're already ahead of that. It's an odd one because Leinster's defence was very, very good last season. Those 2 games aside where things did fall apart a little bit, we actually had one of the strongest defences in Europe. This looks a little bit more like the defence of the season before when Jacques Nienaber had just come in and there were still a few things that kind of needed to be worked out. What's a little disconcerting this time is that we are now 2 seasons into this, and actually a lot of those old frailties seem to be re-emerging. Munster seem to be able to find space very, very easily whenever they went wide. They seem to be able to just kind of really make inroads at ease when they were attacking, and we really seem to struggle to deal with it. And it's the same story against Stormers. It's the same story against Bulls. It wasn't the same story against Sharks, but they might be the only team of superstars having an even more disappointing start to the season than us. It was just a really flat, disappointing game in many ways, and it's hard to maybe. While I don't want to give too many excuses for a game in which we were quite obviously second best, I do think there is a bit of an international window hangover here. We had 4 of the starting 15 playing their first game of the season. We had 6 of the full 23, and another few who were only on their second game. And I think it explains the performance of at least some of those players. RG Snyman had maybe his worst performance in the Leinster shirt before going off injured to compound a really bad day for him. Some of his offloads. He's a player who, when he's at his best, he is the ultimate highlight reel player. Some of the things he does are amazing, but he was very guilty of trying to force the game too much yesterday, and just repeatedly kind of handing the ball off back to Munster with poor offloads. But he was far from the only one. Players like Gary Ringrose, who was just kind of anonymous, not bad exactly, but he just kind of didn't have that impact he'd wanted to have. Gibson Park, who had a very off day, not just his pass that Coughlin intercepted, but just didn't seem to have that zip or that kind of tactical acumen that we're so used to seeing from him. And it just meant, and James Lowe, who unfortunately is continuing a bad run of form that really kind of extends from the end of last season. So it was a little bit disappointing. There's been a lot of talk. Obviously, we are we are 1 win from 4. It's bad no matter way you look at it, and a lot of kind of significant negativity already from Leinster fans, unsurprisingly. The first couple of games down South Africa, whatever, this is a game with all of our stars back against Munster in Dublin. It's a really tough one to lose like this. And I'm not saying that there isn't some serious issues here and some things that need to be worked on. What I will say is that rugby is a systems game, and being a little bit off can make a massive difference on the pitch and on the scoreboard. Sometimes things can look worse than they are, and I do think that some of these issues might be fixable. We've got kind of the frontliners will go away. They're going to get some time together with Ireland, and then they'll have some time together in Europe. And hopefully by then we'll be looking a bit more cohesive and solid, and maybe some of this kind of early kind of ring rustiness may have worn itself out. As Leinster found to their cost over the last few seasons, it's not how you start the season, it's how you end it. If we are, building to something more impressive by the end of the season, then no one's going to remember those early games. We might remember the Munster one. Those ones are always tough to take, but broadly, it won't be too bad. But if we're still looking like this by the time of the Christmas New Year's Interpros, then that is going to be a real problem. So I'm not hitting the panic button just yet. It is early days. It's been a really unimpressive start to the season. I do think that, a bit more time together and we might start to see some things improve, but, they do need to improve a lot. Yesterday was a really, really bad performance.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. You can look at this from several different angles. I mean, I'd love to talk about, we can say that the players hadn't bedded in yet, but I mean, that's not really an excuse. I mean, that's something that Irish rugby chooses to do. Give players rests and stuff. There's 16 teams in the league, and they're ready. Some of them are ready from week 1. So it's kind of a sacrifice you make, and you still, whatever team you put out there, you expect them to perform. You can talk about Lions players having been away, and all this kind of stuff. But listen, it's about the players on the day and how they're playing. We spoke in the week 1 of the Stormers about how we almost didn't recognize Leinster's attack. There wasn't an attack. We didn't get any points in Cape Town. It was a little better. We got a try bonus point against the Bulls. It was better again against the Sharks. But sometimes you play teams who are going to play their own way no matter what. And if you've got a good style that works against them, that's going to work. But when you come up against a team that's that's kind of waiting in the tall grass and ready for the way you play, been doing their homework. Leinster have been relying on these fizz passes out wide, long miss passes to get quickly out into the wide channels, but also offloading games up the middle. When you've got a team that's gonna aim to cut out both of those things, you're going to struggle. And if you can't fix it in game, we're going to see what happened at Croke Park. And it was a frustrating day all around. We seemed, Sam, I'm not going to pin it all on him. I know he's the first name I'm mentioning, but literally his first carry of the ball in the first minute, he looked, it's like he was looking around him, and the picture he sees, like when a quarterback is ready to take the snap and he looks at the defense and goes, well, what the hell? But you can't do that in rugby. You're in the game, you're playing, you've got to make a decision. And he didn't seem able to do that. And the whole dynamic between himself and Gibson Park just wasn't working. And that spread throughout the whole team. Yes, the forwards were struggling in the loose. They were doing great at the set pieces, but they when it came to the breakdown and stuff, it just wasn't happening. You had Snyman not doing his offloads, but he was doing the offloads, but they weren't on. None of them were on. There were kick passes that weren't on. It was just the decision making in key situations that wasn't happening. It was frustrating to see from start to finish, particularly when the set piece was working so well. The scrum penalties, winning scrums, just even the fact that we were guaranteed a good platform off our own ball, plus the lineouts that would follow them up after the penalties, they were almost pretty much flawless. I think there was one that was a bit messy, but we still retained possession. It was all about what we did with that possession. We're going to talk about Munster later. We're going to give them their credit, but this segment is about Leinster's issues. I know I've tried my best in all the different social platforms to say, Munster, we're the better team. They deserve to win. But we're a Leinster podcast. We're going to look at Leinster's issues. And in this particular game, it was the attack strategy. Obviously, the defense wasn't great either, but a lot of the things, it wasn't not just the interception try, but a lot of the Munster advancing up the field came directly after Leinster had a sort of an epic fail in her style of attack. So there was a lot of issues there. Can they be worked on? Well, listen, when it's 3 defeats out of 4, and the same things keep cropping up again, you believe they can be worked on, but you just have to wait and see. Well, elsewhere in the URC, Ulster had an impressive away bonus point win as they overturned the Sharks in Durban, while Connacht nearly clawed their way back against the Bulls, but despite falling short by a point, they still picked up 2 handy bonus points themselves on the URC table. There were also wins for Cardiff, Embra, the Lions, Glasgow, and the Stormers, who still lead the table after 4 rounds on points difference over Munster, while Leinster are, let's go with outside the top 8. But now we must return to Croker, and while we've looked at what was going wrong on Leinster's side of things, I suppose it's only fair to acknowledge Munster's part of the result, because they certainly were doing a lot of things right, weren't they?
Yeah, and I'm not looking forward to having to say nice things about Munster, but they were very, very impressive yesterday. It's the best I've seen them play in a good couple of seasons. And what's funny was I was actually, when I was kind of rewatching the match today, I suddenly realized I actually did this match last year, the equivalent in last year's game, Leinster versus Munster in Dublin at Croke Park. And I realized that this was actually in a weird way a kind of a carbon copy, but in reverse of that game, where we jumped out to an early lead, despite not necessarily having a huge amount of the ball, but kind of just scoring when we did, and then weathered a second half response from Munster that ultimately fell short. And it really is amazing what a difference a year makes in terms of both our performance, but also Munster's, who just looked so much more on it today. They were very happy to let us have the ball, and they had very little of it themselves, but they seemed confident in their ability to kind of score when they to take those chances when they did happen, and they certainly seemed very confident in their ability to defend against us. The kind of long passages, again, we mentioned at the end of the first half, also that extended period in the second half where they really just defended like demons. We were on their line. We were, most teams would have faltered or certainly conceded more tries than they did, but actually they just held incredibly solid. Seemed to read our defense well. You mentioned Sam, and I said, well, I don't think that it was entirely on him. I think some of his play proved a little bit too easy to read. They're able to fold across relatively easily, but also they were able to kind of stop our forwards on the gain line. We were getting very little kind of go forward, and some of their maul and breakdown work was really impressive. And this the kind of the key stat in this game in many ways is that they had 15 turnovers to our 5. It just felt like every single Leinster attack would inevitably end with a Munster player getting on the ball. Kind of even things that were working. I mentioned them all. We scored them all, early on, and it looked like a bit of a weapon. But pretty much after that, they always seemed to find a way to break it down. To the amount of our lineouts on their 5 meter line that ended with them managing to kill our maul. Happened time and time again. The tackling, the breakdown work, the kind of the speed at which they would get over a ball. We often failed to resource our rucks properly, and they showed no such issues. And while their front row, I think, had a tough day, again, one area where Leinster did dominate, the rest of their pack was very, very impressive. Edwin Adogbo and Finian Wycherley in the second row, the entire back row, but in particular Beirne, who I'll come to more in a moment. It just, kind of for all the kind of the vaunted Lions-filled Leinster pack, actually, it was the Munster pack that, for the most part, was on top. They were very, they made some smart use of the dark arts. They did some very effective slowing down of our ball. I'm not complaining. This is what all the best teams do. Knowing where just the right line is, just how much you can do to slow the ball down without getting too much on the referee's bad side. I do think they were a little bit fortunate not to pick up, a yellow card earlier in the game than they did. 14 penalties to 7, including a kind of a string of about 5 in a row at one stage. But look, I don't think it would have changed the results either way. They were very, very effective. They looked like the sharper team. They've had a few games together. They looked more settled, but it does feel like they had a plan for this game, that they came into this game knowing how they were going to target Leinster, and they did so incredibly effectively. And a few players really did stand out. Jack Crowley, have to mention, this was billed as the Battle of the Ireland Tens. And while I don't want to turn this too much into a kind of a player versus player thing, because I think it's too simplistic, but Jack Crowley was very impressive. He, I think a little bit of a kind of shaky start in the first few minutes, but actually after that settled down incredibly well. Some of his kicking out of hand was brilliant. A beautiful clearance kick in the first half when Munster were under the cosh. Some of his kind of play and attack, so his passing was absolutely lovely, but he's great at taking the ball into contact, and he's a very, very effective defensive player on his day. He loves throwing himself into contact, and I just thought he had a very effective game, controlled the ball, great game, very, very, very well. Was awarded player of the match, and I certainly wouldn't quibble too much about that, although my personal player of the match was Beirne. Beirne is, it's not that people don't recognize that he's a great player, because he is, but I think he's one of the best players in the world. And I sometimes don't think he is given enough credit on that. I talked about kind of Lions hangover. Beirne certainly didn't seem to have any of that. He has these games sometimes where it's like he's decided that the ball is his and no one else is going to have it. I'm thinking back to Ireland versus New Zealand 2022. I'm thinking back to actually the first test against Australia in the Lions tour this year, where you just see him kind of repeatedly get over the ball, repeatedly put in tackles, repeatedly make turnovers, and it just is, particularly in the second half yesterday, it just felt like nothing was going to stop him from wrecking our game. He was absolutely brilliant. But I think one of the things that really I think is marking out Munster now compared to a couple of seasons ago, and we've seen it a bit in the Ireland under-20s over the last couple of years, where an increasing number of the players who are coming through that setup who are looking really impressive are Munster players. There's been a kind of an issue for the last few years where it's been very Leinster dominated, and I think we might be starting to see that change. But you look at some of the players, I mentioned Adogbo already, but he was so good, particularly in that first half. In the build-up to their first try, he is just knocking holes in the Leinster defence. He's such a hard man to stop. Again, he's a very, very young man. And if he can stay injury-free, then he's a real kind of game-changer player for them, a bit like Joe McCarthy has been for us. Brian Gleeson, who got the first try, what a player he looks. He was just so effective again. would just kind of going in direct, Route 1 rugby, but it was really, really working. And again, he's a very hard man to stop and a very, very young, very impressive looking player. And it was a real shame to see him go off injured. He was meant to be going as a training panelist with the Ireland squad. That doesn't look likely now. And I think that's a real shame because I think he is a very bright future in both red and green ahead of him. And then just a word for Coughlin as well. Craig Casey obviously not playing this game. It was one of the areas where you kind of would have said going into it that Leinster had the advantage with Jameson Gibson-Park there. The best nine on the pitch yesterday was Ethan Coughlin. He was just kind of brilliant at directing the play. Read Gibson-Park's passes incredibly well, had one interception and nearly came off with another. But he just looked incredibly sharp. He's looked very impressive on multiple occasions for Munster now. And I think, it's yet more evidence that actually scrum half, which is a position that Ireland were worried about a few years ago, there's a lot of really, really good young scrum halves in Ireland at the moment. And Coughlin looks another one of them. So Munster have had a very good start to the season. They've been building into it. They've won all four of their games. They haven't looked necessarily super impressive in a couple of those, but they've always won them. And they just look like a team that is looking more confident, looking more together, looking more solid than in the last couple of seasons. I think it helps. The last couple of seasons, they've basically already been mid-injury crisis by this stage. And if they can just keep some of these players fit, if they can keep kind of their injury list to a kind of a normal level, then there's no reason why they can't yet again challenge for the URC this season. It's a tough one to take. It's only the second time we've lost to Munster in 7 or 8 years, I think. But yesterday was as brutal thumping as they've given us in quite a long time. It was well deserved on the day. Much the better team, and hopefully we'll get revenge in Thomond over the Christmas period. But we'll need to wash the bad taste out of our mouths, I think.
Absolutely. No, you said it. You said at one stage there that you would have said before the game that they would have missed Craig Casey. That's exactly what I did say in our preview, and that's why that was my clinching argument in saying that I thought Leinster were going to win. I had Leinster by 10 points, but Ethan Coughlin, it's like he took those words and made me have them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was a great performance. He really showed that he belongs at that level. Jack, plenty's been said about him. I mean, not even contrasting him against Sam. I think Jack was slow getting into the game as well. He had a couple of errors in the early stages as well, but once he settled. Once Munster had gotten into it and showed that they could score, he controlled the game really well. I mean, you say Munster didn't have much possession, but they used it really well. He just kicked it out. That's all he really had to do once Munster had a lead. Yeah, between him and Beirne, I think it was always going to be Jack because he was so dominant over Sam. All the talk was Jack versus Sam. I think it was a lot easier for the broadcasters just to give it to Jack. I was very impressed with Tig as well. You expect that from him in every game. The one frustrating thing with regards to Beirne is that in one of the turnovers that he did, I think he got 4. Was credited with 4 overall. One of them was a line out where I think our plan was to maul. I think our plan was to sort of recreate the Ronan Kelleher try, but I think Dan Sheehan was on at this point. It wasn't on. Again, like I said about with Sam and his decision making, this play was not on the way Munster were shaping up. We had the primary shove. The obvious thing to do is to break away, but they insisted on keep going because that's what the plan was. He peeled off straight into Beirne, the one person you don't want to run into, and next thing the thing was over. That was frustrating as hell. You mentioned the penalties. We've left it this long to mention them, so I hope it's appreciated. Two things can be true. Munster deserved to win, but they could have also deserved at least a warning. It was just ironic, particularly for taking out the 9 was a particular thing. I counted 3 times in the first half when that was the call. At least a warning. And the ironic thing is that when Josh got frustrated with that, he was the one who got the warning in the second half. So and as for that penalty try at the end, there's a lot of debate about it. What was going on? It all depends on how you look at it, how you define what that situation is. We all know rugby's got its gray areas in the laws and stuff. How you define that situation was it a tackle area? Was it a try scoring opportunity? Was it a try scoring attempt? What was Kieran Frawley entitled to do? But I think Munster were confused. If you want to talk about how that situation can be explained. I think that if the officials hadn't said anything about Frawley's involvement, I don't really honestly don't think anyone would have complained. They just would have said, "Listen, let's go back." And from Leinster's point of view, we just kicked the ball away. We try to chip over top of our own 22. That's how they got possession. I know we were desperate to get scores at that stage of the game, but a lot of the opportunities were ones that we just literally handed to Munster on the day, and that was frustrating. But we're obviously the focal point is Munster here. We're talking about them and their involvement, and the fact is that when we handed them the situation, they were able to convert every time, and they got the result as the end of it. Other individual performances, you mentioned Idogbo, Gleeson, that's all true. Nankerville was very good. He came on early on. Andrew Smith, very unlucky. He's been playing well for them as well, but he got injured in the first 9 minutes. But what a guy to be able to bring on. And he was on the wing. He was on James Lowe's wing, kept him quiet pretty much the whole game. As well, but got in turnovers himself, got stuck in, put his hand up for future for getting picked in the team again. That Farrell try, very impressive. You can't argue with that. The little tip to himself, it was that was class in itself. And there was, they say luck, you make your own luck. That was a quality try. But the others were just ones that we gave to them, but they were looking for them. I mean, that one interception try, that wasn't an outlier. There was a couple of other situations. They were actively looking for those. It's the kind of thing where you'd say in training, I'd say McMillan or one of the other coaches, Prendergast or something, said to them, lads, look what they're doing. Look the way they're setting up. They're setting up big missed passes out wide. If you're ready for them, if you're positioned right, there's interceptions to be had there, and they did get it. So we're going to have to look at that as well. But it's an impressive display, and it's basically shown all our opposition the rest of the season. This is where I'm worried. The top top table European teams, they're going to say, well, this is how you can beat Leinster, and they're going to be prepared. So we're going to need to rethink. But from Munster's point of view, they're looking at their own. McMillan looks like he's got a good regime going in there, and they've got their own chances. You say they're 4 wins out of 4. We had comments on Facebook from, we read out the Leinster comments here. There was Sarah Lennon who said the team was disjointed, two-dimensional and predictable. They played like strangers. Munster, as good as they were, simply needed to do the basics well. Kevin Callahan said Leinster badly missed Joe McCarthy, Ryan Baird, Jack Conan, Hugo Keenan, and Clayton Doris, with Prendergast, Lowe, and Sneeman all extremely rusty. But hats off to Munster to playing their game plan and executing scraps into 7-point scores. And Gavin Hegarty said, I'm embarrassed by that performance. Lions and internationals on the pitch, beaten by a team that wanted it more. Listen, just be sure to tune into our Facebook page and leave a comment on our post after the full-time whistle of every Leinster and Ireland match this season. Well, listen, I think we've talked about that for long enough. We're going to leave it there for now. Many thanks to Hugo for joining us. We're looking forward to having you back on soon, man. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I'll hopefully come back on for a win next time.
We'll try to organize that somehow. I don't know. We had John for the Northampton game as well, so I'm doing something wrong have to get onto the Harpin schedule and department. Yeah. But as ever, listen, be sure to stay tuned to Harpin on Rugby and all the socials during the week, starting with our bonus chat posting on YouTube on Tuesday, where we'll be harping on the Irish November squad. Then our 80+ column, where we try to look at the wider rugby world. That post on Wednesday over on Substack. So take care, and in the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Slán.